Before we get into today's episode, want to make sure you're aware of some upcoming events with us here at the Malfers Group. First of all, me and Scott, are going to be in Sarasota, Florida on February the 16th at Bayside Community Church doing one of our one-day strategic envisioning events. It's going to be great. It lasts from 9 to 3, lunch is included. It's just $30 per person for that. You're going to come away with some great information about helping your church get organized. We're going to then be the next day on February 17th up north in the Tampa Clearwater area at Church Experience. And same event, so you don't need to come to both of them. If you are a little bit, south, then go to Sarasota. If you're up north of Tampa Bay, then maybe the event up there is going to be better for you. We would love to have you from anywhere, though, if you wanted to drive in. In fact, we've got some folks even coming up from Miami that we're already aware of, so that's cool. Road trip it out. And then after that, later in, is it February or March, Scott, we have another guide training event happening.
It's actually in March. So if you thought, man, what these guys do at the Malfers Group, I think I could do that. I like to help churches. Maybe you're a pastor and you're looking to retire, or maybe you're a pastor and you want to just add a little side ministry. I don't want to call it a side gig, a side ministry, or some other reason that you might be thinking, man, I'd love to help churches. We would love to certify you in the strategic envisioning process. And so that certification event is happening on March 7th, 8th, and 9th. That's a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. It's all 3 days. 9 to 3 on each of those days to go through the certification process. It is done virtually, so you can be anywhere in the country or anywhere in the world, I suppose, and just be joining us from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern time on a Monday the 7th, Tuesday the 8th, Wednesday the 9th. And you can also register for that and the Sarasota and Clearwater events at malfersgroup.com/events. So we would love to see you in person or meet you as a part of our certification process. To learn more about these events and to sign up, go to malfersgroup.com/events. Now on to the episode.
Recruiting and retaining volunteers is tough. We have some tips to help you today on the Church Revitalization Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malfers Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is Scott Ball, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host, AJ Matthew. AJ, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, man. Good to see you. Great topic today. Volunteers.
Yes. So I've been a church volunteer. I am a church volunteer. I have led church volunteer teams. I've helped churches recruit and retain and develop volunteer teams. So I feel like this is a topic. I know I'm not going to call myself an expert, maybe.
Oh, that's quite a resume, though. That's impressive. Just to one up you, I volunteered yesterday. I have the most recent volunteerism among the two of us.
Okay, yep, that's definitely true. Yeah, for sure. You win. But today we want to talk about the hidden tool for volunteer recruitment and retaining volunteers that a lot of churches don't think about. And that's the volunteer job description.
Yeah. And it's rare, I would say. It's rare that I talk with the church about volunteer job descriptions. They're like, oh yeah, we did that a long time ago. We've always done that. It's usually not. In fact, most churches, I would say, this would be another topic, but don't even have a really solid list of how many volunteer positions they even have.
Yeah, that's a fair point. My experience has been that there's usually some ministry within the church that has job descriptions. There's some highly organized individual or a person who previously, a highly organized person who previously had the position. And so they've got some job descriptions. Usually this is in children's ministry. My experience has been Whoever runs children's ministry probably has job descriptions for their different positions, but by and large, not seen across the church. And these are a really useful tool. And so today, what I want to talk about is, how do you write a volunteer job description? What are the 5 different components to it? And maybe a little secret hidden gem here, AJ, as we go through these 5 components of writing a volunteer job description, we may actually touch on some things you haven't thought about as it relates to your volunteers in the first place. So just this job description process may prompt you to think about some things that you haven't thought about before or in a very long time.
Okay, well, good. Well, I'm excited. I'll be surprised as well then, since we didn't talk about that before.
Okay.
But that's good. You get my genuine reaction. All right, let's
Good.
kick this off. Our first tip here is making it clear who the person even reports to. And as fundamental as that may seem, there are definitely people in your church right now that are serving in one capacity or another, and they may not be absolutely sure who is in charge of that issue, who they should go to. This happens a lot in more disorganized volunteer organizations in which people, especially at lower levels, but this happens even in upper levels of leadership as well, get information from a variety of sources, and it always leaves them wondering who exactly is my upline, my next person in charge. And because they might be told by a variety of people of what to do or how to do something. They might get emails from various people talking about their schedule and all this different information. And it could leave them wondering. So who exactly does your volunteer need to go to if they have a problem? And that's the most critical thing, because if something weird comes up, the quickest route for them to get an answer is best. And that's what's going to help give them the comfort that they need to handle the situation, and know that they've handled it correctly, is by going to the right person the first time.
Yeah. This is, I think, what might seem very obvious that in a job description you would want to put who does it report to. But I think there are a couple of potholes here that churches sometimes find themselves getting stuck in. The first one is precisely what you've mentioned, that a person in theory has one person that they report to, but in practice has several. And that can be very frustrating for a volunteer, especially because they don't know who exactly is in charge, who makes the decision. The buck stops with who exactly. And so when they are encountering an issue where they need a decision made on something, or if they need to ask for permission for something, if it feels like I've got to go through 5 different people to get an answer, that's not good. So you really want to establish who is in charge when I have a problem. The second pothole that churches fall into when it comes to filling this part out is monitoring span of control. So that's just a fancy way of saying, if you have too many people reporting to you, you can't properly manage them. And so if you are the children's pastor or children's director, and you have 100 volunteers, or maybe you're in a smaller church and you've got 30 volunteers, okay, that's still too many people for you to directly manage and serve well. So the first, I guess, maybe hidden gem in this that might prompt further discussion is, how are we structured? When we talk about leadership pipeline design, work that I do with a lot of churches, we're asking this question: how are we structured? And so we want to monitor that span of control. So as you fill this area out, you want to be clear about who someone ought to go to when there is a problem, but it should also prompt a discussion. Is one person responsible for too many volunteers? And if that's the case, then we maybe need to break that job up into multiple smaller roles so that we can better manage the team, manage the volunteers, and give them the attention that they really deserve when they serve on your team.
Yeah. Well, in this scenario actually happened. I mean, I was joking that I volunteered yesterday, and I did on a project that our church was doing. And the leader of this volunteer area was not going to be available for this project. And he delegated to me to sort of manage, just the what, where, when for the people that were going to be available for it. And we
Sure.
were in the midst of working on this thing yesterday, but I overheard one of the other volunteers ask, sort of, I think, open just into the ether for anybody to answer. So who is in charge of this? And I think he was probably thinking, I know I've gotten information from somebody else, the real leader of the ministry, but then this guy AJ was sending out information, and I think his question was like, who's the guy?
Who's the boss?
Yeah. And so because that was not made clear to everybody, simply that, who normally would be in charge was not available, and so somebody else was kind of wrangling the wranglers. So this is a common thing. Who exactly is in charge of an area?
For sure. Yeah. So you want to start with that at the top of your job description. You're going to put reports to ...
Reports to who or whom, whatever the case may be. All right, number 2, divine design alignment. And this, man, I love this one so much, because it was just, when I was, just coming up as a leader and a volunteer in church, it was transformational for me to begin to understand my temperament and my spiritual gifts. And I just love when churches do this. Some churches push back on spiritual gifts from a theological standpoint. That's fine. You can wrestle with that and talk about that on your own. But understanding to at least a basic level, and this is, I think, especially important for new believers, how has God really gifted me, positioned me, given me experience and natural talents to make me a best fit for a ministry area? And man, this is just a way of getting somebody at least into the ballpark, get them out of the parking lot and into the stadium, at least, of figuring out where they might fit in best at your church. And it's probably not going to be one singular thing. It's probably going to be several things that might be a good fit. But if in our job descriptions, we have at least a general outline of the type of person that might be a good fit for that, it's not 100% perfect, but it's probably going to help get you, as I said, in the ballpark on getting the right person in the right seat on the bus.
Yeah. So this is an area where I think it makes a big difference if you're able to have this thing outlined. And it takes a little bit of back work because you have to do some thinking about it. And you've got to do some hard work in figuring out which spiritual gifts set. So just to be clear, when we say divine design alignment, what do we even mean by that? So it means that God has hardwired you and designed you in a particular way and given you a specific set of, I've been given a very specific set of skills. Isn't that what the Liam Neeson says in that Taken movie? At any rate, you haven't seen it?
No. You shouldn't be surprised. I don't see many movies.
Okay. We'll just put a pin in that one, listener. But God has given you a certain set of skills and abilities and giftedness and a special grace gift, which is the word that Paul uses, charismata, which means grace gift. It doesn't mean run around with flags necessarily, although I guess some churches do that, and that's not making a judgment call one way or the other on that one. But you are given a grace gift, and that's where we get this idea of spiritual gifts from. And so you as a church, you got to figure out, well, what's the spiritual gifts set that we agree on and go, okay, we think that these are gifts that people in our church might have. And then you can start sorting all of your jobs, all your volunteer roles according to those. Someone with this gift might do well here. Someone with this gift might do well here. Mm-hmm. And the other element we like to use, or I really recommend, is the DISC assessment, DISC. If you're not familiar with the DISC, you can read all about it online. I'm not saying it's the end all be all temperament or personality assessment. It's not. It's just really easy. I don't want to go in depth here on it, but essentially think of two axes. If you're just listening, just kind of imagine a horizontal axis that is sort of a task orientation on the left to people orientation on the right. And then think of a horizontal axis with extroversion on the top and introversion on the bottom. And it kind of creates these four buckets. So you can be task oriented and extroverted. You can be people oriented and extroverted. You can be people oriented and introverted, and you can be task oriented and introverted. And it creates these 4 very distinct buckets, which align with the D, the I, the S, and the C. So without getting into too much detail here on the podcast, if you can use those 2 criteria, the DISC, so the temperament, all right, is this a task or people orientation? Is this introversion, extroversion? Which kind of person, D, I, S, or C, might thrive in this position? Add on top of that spiritual gifts. Now you have essentially, Ajax filters, if you want to think of it that way, that you can use to, like you would use on a website if you were trying to search for a car. I'm looking for this model, this year, whatever. You can do that with jobs and go, okay, I have these spiritual gifts. I've got, this is my temperament. What roles might I thrive in?
Yeah.
One thing I want to say on this, AJ, that's come up a couple of times, it's that these are not the divine design alignment. It's not a barrier. So we're not saying you have to have this divine design alignment to serve in this position. It's only, as you said, AJ, getting someone in the ballpark. It's helping them to think, is this something I'm going to enjoy, or is this something that's going to be difficult? Because I don't know about you, but I have volunteered in some way or some places that were maybe not a great fit for me, and it was a less enjoyable experience.
Yeah. There you go. And
I'll put on that list, VBS. Never have me serve at VBS.
Children's ministry.
I won't enjoy it.
Maybe not so much. For clarity, also horizontal, side to side. Vertical is what we call the up and down axis.
Did I reverse those?
But it's okay. And if you're watching on YouTube, I just gave you the visual for that.
Sorry.
And yeah,
I know that, but and
the fact that I had to point that out. Now, people, if you are familiar with disc, you can probably pinpoint me on the disc at this point, since I had to make sure that we all knew which way that was. Moving on.
And that I just was so casually reversing horizontal and vertical because I'm in the moment. Also tells you where I am at on the disc. So
that's why we're a great team.
Everybody's like, he's an idiot. He's an expert in volunteers. He doesn't even know what up and down and side to side is. What a dummy.
Scott's whole life is angles, man.
You're doing up and down, side to side. I'm playing 4D chess, my friend.
All right.
This is the gold that the podcast listeners hope for.
Maybe this will be a strong episode after this one gets shared. They're like, oh, just fast forward to 4 minutes. Hey, our third point here is responsibilities. People need to know what is this job actually about? What am I going to be doing? And believe it or not, this is not self-evident to everybody. And it's not made clear to a lot of people, unfortunately. Maybe it might start off one way, but there's a lot of job creep that happens also, because you're like, oh, we have a volunteer and now we can ask them to do everything. And that's a slippery slope. So having some defined responsibilities for the job in writing is a really great idea. It's okay when somebody's out sick and we ask somebody to help out in another area. But for the most part, having clearly defined job responsibilities is now, if this is a comfort thing for people out there that are uneasy about maybe stepping into something, having something down that they're like, okay, I can kind of visualize what this is all about and the types of things that I'm going to be doing. That can help on the recruitment side of things by, being able to say, this is what we need you to do. And again, with things come up and that's okay. But by and large, this will really help on the recruitment side. It also helps on the evaluation side of being able to measure how somebody did against what we told them they were going to be doing. So understanding responsibilities, vitally important in our volunteer arrangements.
Yeah, this is probably the most self-explanatory aspect of the job description. In fact, when we titled this and it said how to write volunteer job descriptions, you probably went to, yeah, I know how to do that. You just list what the position does. And that's part of it. It's one part of 5 parts of it. And so this is it. So this is the part that you probably thought, well, isn't that all what a job description is? The response is no, but it is part, and it's this part. So just write what it is that you do. Keep it short, though. You don't need like paragraphs and paragraphs of This is what you're going to feel when you're in the job and in the moment. Although that might be something that I might do.
I would have 2 bullet points. You would have a page description. Yeah.
And then we would marry them together, and we would have 5 bullet points.
Each with 3 sentences. Yeah.
That's
All right, man, I didn't think this was going to be such a fun episode. Hey, our 4th point today is identifying the time requirements. And again, this is a really important one because, I mean, look around your church. You're struggling probably to get volunteers in the first place. And it's because everybody is either actually busy or they perceive their lives as busy and not really finding time for you in the church and what needs to get done. So identifying time requirements is vitally important so that people can maybe take a breath, look at their calendar and say, you know what, I actually can fit this in. And then again, like responsibility creep, time creep is something that we want to avoid. And of course, the best way to do that is to actually be staffed, with everybody that you need. But yeah, being able to tell people, yeah, here's the time that you need to carve out. We try to do this whenever we talk about our strategic leadership teams that we do whenever we're working with the church on strategic envisioning. We're like, yeah, there's going to be a meeting that we're going to, on a Friday and Saturday, we're going to do this. Ongoing, you're going to be meeting on Saturdays or once a month for a certain amount of time. And then there's another time required for this or that. So, I mean, some of this is common courtesy, even just to let people know what to expect. But it's another key aspect of this. It's important to people.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point. You've got to really consider all the aspects of the time requirement. So don't just think about how often that they're serving, but also think how much time they need to devote to training or even to the onboarding process. And if you're thinking time devoted for training, we don't do any ongoing training. This is another one of those points, those hidden secret gems in this episode, where maybe you ought to think about something you've not thought about before, which is you ought to be doing ongoing training. We talk about in our leadership pipeline process, there being 3 key phases of the leadership development process. It's assessing leaders, it's training leaders, and launching leaders. And so this is that training component, and it's ongoing. So I always joke with the churches when I'm going through pipeline, when do we apply this process? And the answer is all the time, because it's always leadership development season at your church. So the training component is not just onboarding. Lots of times we think, oh, it's just onboarding. But no, it's onboarding, and then it's ongoing. And I would encourage you, AJ, we've done a couple of episodes, I think, on training and ways to do training that are maybe better than the way that you might currently be doing training. So I don't know if I can remember which episode number that is. I'll link it in today's show notes. How about that?
Sounds good. With such a vast library on the podcast.
Yes, it's hard to remember.
It is very
we
hard.
We are on episode 125. So, I mean, to be fair, it is hard to remember all of it.
That's good.
I will say this too. The frequency of volunteering matters. Does someone wants to know, am I signing my life away? Am I signing my life away? Am I going to have to do this every week, every other week, once a month, once every 6 weeks? Just be very clear and then stick to that. Yeah. Don't say it's going to be twice a month and then it's every week. Mm-hmm. People have to fill in and life happens and those kinds of things. I'm not talking about the exceptions. I'm talking about don't make a habit of breaking what you said the time requirements were going to be.
Yeah. All right. And our 5th point today is noting the competencies required to serve best, to perform best in whatever role this volunteer position is. And there's 2 sides to competencies. There should be core competencies that span all positions in the church, some fundamental things that we want to see in people across any position. But then there's proprietary competencies as well that would relate only to that position, some particular skill set. Think of worship team. Our singers should be able to keep a pitch and stay in key. So, that would be a proprietary competency. Whereas, a competency, I don't know how you would even describe this, Scott, but I mean, of course, we want people that are responsible, that show up on time. I mean, no matter who you are, we want certain things, and they could be fundamental to the faith or just to other values of the church. But there are two sides to competencies, and it should be noted for both in all of our positions.
Yeah. So this is another one of those hidden gems, things that maybe you've not thought much about. And just working on your volunteer job descriptions might prompt a deeper discussion. But in the leadership pipeline design workshop that we do, we work on developing core competencies. And so what we try to do is select 6 to 8 what I call buckets, categories of leadership competency. So there are things, it varies from church to church because every church decides what is core. We ask the question, what is central and core to leadership? What are the things that all leaders in the church need to be able to do at some level? So communication, for example, is often one of them. You need to be able to communicate. Another common one would be on the character side, might be something like integrity or godliness. And so we would expect all of our leaders to be godly. And once we've identified what those are, we can scale them up and down. So we define particular number of levels of leadership within the church and assign those different positions to a level. So you wouldn't probably use the terms level 1, level 2, and so on, but you would say, just for the purposes of talking about it, it's easy to say a greeter is a level 1 position. It's kind of a low bar. Just about anybody could be a greeter. So then what are the leadership competencies for a level 1 leader? Probably very simple things. So like when it comes to communication, it's going to be things like responds to messages from supervisor or something like that. Like when you get an email or a text message, you actually respond to it. That's a very low bar, but something that not everyone does, right? It's a clear expectation for someone at that level. So you want to define what those competencies are. We typically make it in a chart, and then depending on the level of leadership that job corresponds to. So let's say you're making a greeter's job description, you would essentially copy and paste all of the responsibilities or the core competencies, I should say, for level 1 leaders. Then there would also be, like you pointed out, AJ, proprietary competencies, which would be competencies that are specific to that job that aren't part of the core group. So yeah, if you're playing in the band, you need to be able to play an instrument. If you're working with kids, you maybe need to have gone through some sort of safe space training, or things like that. So there may be specific competencies that are required that are tied specifically to a position, whereas the core competencies are tied to a level of leadership that are applied across the church. Hopefully that makes sense. I think we've talked about this also in some other episodes. Maybe if I can remember the number on that, I'll also link that in the show notes.
We have a spreadsheet, so we'll review the spreadsheet, see if we can find what that number is.
Yes, so. You can imagine, based on this episode, who's responsible for that spreadsheet. Is it me or is it AJ? We won't even need to say. We'll just let people guess.
Drop your comment below on YouTube.
Okay, I think we should maybe do a quick recap. So what are the 5 components, AJ, of a job?
There we go. 5 components of a solid volunteer job description. Identifying who the person reports to. It's important for them to know who to go to with problems and for additional training, whatever that might be. The second one is divine design alignment. So finding alignment between a person's temperament, gifting, even the components. If you're familiar with SHAPE, that was put out by Saddleback, of understanding these components, which also includes natural abilities and our experience and different things. Putting all that together so that we have a person that may be a really good fit for a particular area of service. Then identifying what are the responsibilities of the job. People need to know that. You need to know that for evaluation purposes. Identifying the time requirements was our fourth element here, so that people know what to expect as far as how much time out of their lives it's going to take. And then finally, our last point was on competencies, identifying those core competencies across your church and the proprietary ones that are most significant to that particular volunteer role. And with that, I think you would have a great volunteer job description.
We have a volunteer job description template. So this is me putting this out there now. I'm going to ask Molly. I'm going to give it to Molly.
Okay.
Who helps us with the website things.
You can handle it.
And I'm going to say, hey, Molly, can we find a way to get this to people, sign up and download this thing? So if you're thinking, this is great, I wish I had a template. We have a template, and we can provide that for you on today's show notes, which you can find at
malfirstgroup.com/125.
You go.
Or in the video description below on YouTube if you're watching this online. We will link everything that you need to take care of a great volunteer job description, and that would be awesome. Like, share, subscribe on YouTube. If you're listening on a podcast that has the ability to rate, to do a review, then we would love that as well. Share that with some other people. That'd be fantastic. Let's see, Scott, any events that we want to talk about today?
Just a reminder, check out malfirstgroup.com/events to see all the information about the upcoming events that we have going on, particularly in Florida here this month in February. So go ahead and check that out, malfirstgroup.com/events. You can sign up online. We would love to see you there. Again, you can download today's show notes at malfirstgroup.com/125. We appreciate you guys so much. Can't wait to see you next week. See you next time.